Birds fly in different directions. A Batfam Podfic, written by 24-hour daydreamer and read by Heo Stories. Chapter 10. Disgusting, weak, pathetic, useless fill-in that has so far overstayed his welcome. These were the words of thoughts that came to Damien's mind as he stood on the second-story hallway that overlooked one of the many areas on the Manor, leaning on the railway and glowering down at his father and Timothy Drake, sitting on the couch watching some ridiculous television show. His father, not Drake's. Not the second-rate fill-in that has his father seemed intent on keeping around for some reason beyond Damien's comprehension. Damien shoved off the railing and went back to his room, careful to step just so and close to his door with painstaking care to avoid any sound that might alert his father to him being out of bed. Hypocrite. Sending him to bed, but staying up himself to appease the whims of a person with the most unstable sleeping schedule Damien has ever seen. Damien climbed into his bed and sat with his legs crisscrossed, his hands resting on his knees, his back perfectly straight, his gaze fixed straight ahead, glaring at the wall in front of him. His mother told him that there would be unworthy rivals that he would have to dispose of. And he found no problem with that personally, since disposing of rivals was something that he had to be dealt with often in the league. But he had no idea that his father would be so irritatingly attached to them. Grayson was another story entirely. Of the period of deep consideration and watchful study, Damon had decided that he was not so much a rival, especially since Grayson operated in the sister city of Gotham under his own moniker, Nightwing. It would have nothing to do with liking him, of course. Grayson was infuriating and overly physical, or in the emotional skin-crawling way, but Grayson also seemed to be in favor of his father's decision to take the mantle of Robin and bestow it on Damien. So he had removed Grayson from the list of rivals needing to be outright removed. But Drake... There is nothing redeeming about that pathetic worm of a human being. Damon could not deny that his mental abilities were at times passable, but his lack of ability in all other fields far outweighed his critical thinking and deducting ability. Even though his father had removed Robin from him and passed it rightfully to Damien, he still did not seem to get the picture, and instead of making a new mantle for himself that was a ridiculous, pathetic copy of the original, the disaster had a plethora of underlying health deficiencies that the bat seemed to actually ignore or in the least purposefully overlook. Drake could not even breathe correctly at times. He was weak and vulnerable, and as far as his fighting skills were, well, if his father had just stayed out of it and had not been so squeamish, Damien would have removed Drake a long time ago. But that was the crux of Damien's problem with Drake. His father seemed to actually like him and want him around. He had put a complete stop to Damien's plans of forceful usurpation under the threat of sending Damien away. Had not said so outright, but Damien knew that away meant back to his mother, and in his heart of hearts, he really did not want that. Damien's eyes slipped closed as he sighed heavily through his nose. No, removing Drake by ending his pathetic life would not be the answer either. However, Damien was beginning to consider Drake's other weaknesses, his tender emotions, for example. If Damon could only leverage his immunity to such things as feelings and exploit Drake's obvious gravitation towards them, perhaps he could find his way clear to remove Drake by his own volition. All he needed to do was gather enough intelligence to know exactly where to strike, and do so while evading blame or suspicion from his father. It might require a little emotional manipulation and some fake shows of vulnerability to do so, but so be it. It could not be that hard. Drake was easy enough to fluster offhandedly with just right jabs, so if Damien could just find the weak spots, or perhaps even somehow find a way to pull his father in an emotional tool for leverage, perhaps it could work. Me. So, I saw you know who again 2 nights ago from Blue. Huh? Brown Blue. Who are we talking about? Me. Help me out here. Who else would I be using an actual name for? Brown Blue. Brown Blue. Brown Blue. Does it rhyme with bed coot? Tim sat back in his office chair and let his phone fall into his lap as he rolled his eyes and groaned heavily. But he couldn't help but smile regardless. He picked up his phone with a shake of his head and continued his texting conversation with Dick. Me. I'm overlooking how bad that was, and for the sake of ease, yes, yes, it does. Brown Blue. You good? Brown Blue. Do you need to talk? Brown Blue. Like, talk. Brown Blue. I can call? Question mark, question mark, question mark. Brown Blue. Or I could take a sick day and come to Gotham. Brown Blue. Mm, Brown Blue. Asterisk. Gotham. Stupid autocorrect. Tim rolled his eyes again and sighed as his phone binged over and over with rapid fire consecutive texts, which was Dick's habit of when texting, and waited until his phone fell silent before even attempted to write his answer. Me. 1. I'm fine. 2. Maybe I'll call you after work. 3. No, you don't need to come to Gotham. 4. I moved to rename the city to Gotham. Pro in blue. Haha. Brown blue. What was the 5? Brown blue. With lead wood. Me. That one was even worse than Bad could. Somehow. Me. If I was weird, sat next to me for like 50 minutes and ate a burger. Me. And he got mad when he found out I'm not the bird anymore? I know you know. Brown blue. What do you mean? Brown blue. Why would he be mad about that? He didn't want you to be the third. Brown blue. What was the whole problem? Me. Beats me, I told you. It was weird. A knock at the door that connected Tim's office to Bruce's made him look up from his phone. It's open. Bruce stepped in at Tim's invite, gathering his coat over his arm. I'm calling it for the day, Tim, he informed as he looked up from zipping his briefcase closed. I have to pick up Damien from school, and I don't have anything I need to do here that I can't do tomorrow. So I think I'll just stay home for the rest of the afternoon. Shabby, Tim replied, looking back at his phone and reading the text Tim sent back. I'll probably stay for another hour or so. I have a meeting over the phone with a stockholder. all day in half an hour, so I can't leave until that's done for sure. Bruce smiled and leaned his hip against Tim's desk as he watched him text. Am I interrupting something? It took Tim a moment to register what Bruce had said as he was typing his response. He looked up with his brow raised. Huh? I asked if I was interrupting something, Bruce repeated with a small huff of amusement. But I think that answered my question. No, sorry, you're not, Tim assured, stuffing his phone into his pocket with a shrug. It's just Dick, I can answer him later. Bruce nodded with an upward quirk of his eyebrow. I'm glad to hear you two are staying in touch. I know you have had some disagreements at times. Tim shrugged and kicked the side of his desk, so he spun to face Bruce. That was a while ago, and we all patched things up. He chewed his bottom lip and glanced towards at the most recent message that popped up on his digital watch, then looked up at Bruce with a small smile. Regardless of any past issues, Dick is the best person I know. Bruce clicked his tongue and raised a brow. High praise. His voice was slightly tense, but not enough for anyone else to notice but Tim. Tim's eyes widened as he sat up in his chair quickly and held up his hands. One of the best, Bruce. Dick is one of the best people I know. I didn't mean. Bruce chuckled and reached out to ruffle Tim's hair, paying little mind to the fact that he disrupted the gel that had just barely been holding together Tim's more professional-looking style. Relax, kiddo. I know what you meant. Funny to see you sweat, though. Tim glared up at Bruce as his hair fell down on his forehead as he withdrew his hand, though the expression held no heed. You're annoying. I know, but I can send that one right back to you, and you know it. Bruce smirked, though the expression was short-lived as his watch lit up and vibrated. He lifted his wrist and read the message with a smile or frown. Trouble? Tim asked as he tilted his head curiously as he watched Bruce's face. No, not really, Bruce sighed, straightening from his desk and shaking his head. Just Damien reminding me to not be late or otherwise forget about him. Tim rolled his eyes and slumped back in his chair, picking up his ink pen and clicking it against the desk, letting it launch up an inch before catching it and doing it again. Please, you've never forgotten about him. He's convinced that I did once, because I completely forgot, but because I forgot to tell him I would be late, Bruce admitted, setting his briefcase on Tim's desk and pulling on his coat. Tim huffed and shook his head and continued playing with his pen. That kid doesn't know the first thing about being forgotten. The statement had come out a little darker and a little deeper than he had meant it to, and was far too laced with bitterness to not be noticed by a casual passerby, much less Bruce I am Batman Wayne. Bruce froze with one arm on his coat, staring at Tim with that blank, I am analyzing your every blink expression. Tim turned suddenly and clicked the space bar on his keyboard to wake up his computer, clicking open a spreadsheet and trying to make a convincing show of studying the numbers within the cells. Shouldn't you be heading out? I wouldn't want you getting a lecture from your mini-me. He hoped it was an annoying enough statement that Bruce would get huffy and leave, but then again, when had he ever been so lucky? Tim? Bruce's voice held that sort of prying, seeking sort of tone that he used when he was not going to let a subject drop, his hand laying on the back of Tim's chair as he pulled out the vowel of Tim's name. Tim hummed, trying hard to look invested and like he was trying to concentrate. Tim, Bruce repeated, a little shorter this time, as he turned Tim's chair away from the computer so that Tim was looking up at him, looking as though he were trying to shrink into the chair completely. Do we need to talk? Tim huffed and dropped his gaze from Bruce's, picking at a loose thread on a button of his dress shirt. No, you need to go get your kid, and I need to finish my projects for the day. Bruce lowered his hand from the backrest of Tim's office chair and brought it up to rest against Tim's cheek. I should have done something sooner. The words were almost a whisper, and the gentleness of them made Tim look up in surprise to find Bruce looking down at him with his face looking softened and remorseful and hardened by regret. I knew that you were not getting the care and attention that you needed or deserved, but I was too caught up in my own issues to see my way to doing anything about it, Bruce added, his thumb rubbing against Tim's collarbone. Tim tried not to go up against the knot that settled in his throat, laying his hand against Bruce's and forcing a small smile. You did what you could be. Let's be honest, the issues you were dealing with were pretty all consuming, to say the least. The last thing on your mind was your neighbor's kid's problems. Bruce opened his mouth to say more, but his jaw clamped down, swallowing hard as Tim's desk phone started ringing. Tim rolled back and peeked at the caller ID, then smiled apologetically over his shoulder at Bruce. I got to take this, B. It's my stockholder meeting. Bruce nodded, taking an unwilling step back from Tim's desk, his eyes still studying Tim's face carefully. Gotta go get Damien anyway, Tim insisted, picking up the receiver and immediately pressing the hold button. We can talk later. Tim smiled, knowing that it was his too-practiced smile and Bruce would see right through it, but feeling unable to conjure up much else. He don't want to be late picking up His Majesty anyways. He winked and grinned as he unclicked the hold button before putting the phone to his ear. You've reached Tim Wayne. Good afternoon. How are you, Mr. Waltz? Tim waved Bruce on as he traded formalities in his oh so practiced and cheerful phone voice and turned to his meeting notes. Bruce stood by the door for another minute, barely listening to what Tim was saying, but watching him carefully before he finally stepped out of his office and closed the door quietly behind him. It was no secret that Tim had, well, abandonment issues, to say the least, but he hardly ever brought them up. In fact, it was the one topic that he seemed to try to avoid like the plague. Bruce was convinced that somewhere deep down, Tim still denied the fact that Jack and Jen Drake had made the world's worst parent list for a full 15 years in a row, and tried to cling to a false perception and crafted memories of a happy little family that the Drakes had tried so hard to project. They would be talking later, alright, but even if Bruce had to tie the kid down and revoke all caffeine rights until the conversation happened. Bruce was not late. He was not. He was right in time for pick up actually. Damien just happened to be always the first kid waiting on the steps of the school, which did increase his wait time for Bruce, but only artificially. Bruce was going to stand by the fact at all costs. Damien hefted his backpack up off the step he was standing on and slung it over his shoulder, stalking rather than stomping down the sidewalk where Bruce was parked. He didn't look angry, Bruce noted that right away with a little relief, but there was something else about his youngest son that seemed off. Hello, Damien. Bruce greeted as Damien tucked open the door and tossed his backpack into the back seat. I hope you didn't have to wait too long on me. Damien shrugged as he slid into the seat and pulled the door shut behind him. It was an acceptable time to wait since you were driving across town. He paused a moment before he added, Hello to you too, father. Bruce watched Damien for a moment, feeling as though the air inside the car had just become thicker and thereby much more difficult to breathe. Damon sat slightly slumped in his seat, which was strange enough on itself, since Damon never slumped when in public or when in his uniform. His arms were crossed loosely over his chest, and he stared straight forward, with his eyelids only half masked. Bruce tilted his head as he watched him and hummed thoughtfully. Damien, are you feeling all right? Of course, Damon huffed, his eyes cutting over toward Bruce in a slow, lazy sort of way. I'm wondering why we are still sitting here, but other than that, I am fine. Are you sure? Bruce pressed, reaching out and holding the back of his hand against Damien's forehead. You don't look like you're feeling fine at all. You look a little peakish. Damien smirked and pushed Bruce's hand away before waving him off. Peakish? Very British of you, father. Pennyworth must be rubbing off on you again. I assure you, I am all right. Can we please start toward home? Bruce watched Damien a moment more, then put the car into drive and pulled away from the school. In spite of Damien's insistence, Bruce did not feel that Damien was all right in the least. He was only responding to Bruce's questioning about his day when he absolutely had to, hummed when he didn't, and barely rolled his eyes when Bruce asked him to put on his seatbelt. It was when Damien barely hit a yawn behind his hand that Bruce tried again. Are you sure you're feeling okay, son? Bruce asked after a few miles of silent driving. You seem out of sorts, and you really don't seem to be feeling the best. It's alright if you're not feeling well. I'd just like to know. Damon pressed his lips together tightly, then sighed as he looked down at his lap suddenly. I am, perhaps, feeling a little under the weather. What are the symptoms? Bruce pressed, eager now that Damon had begun to crack a little. Sore throat, GI problems, headache. No, no, nothing like that. Although perhaps I do have a bit of a headache, Damon admitted. It was nothing for you to be concerned with, father. I can just actually sleep a little all tonight before and after the patrol. I should be fine. Bruce frowned, glancing from the road to Damien. Actually sleep? Have you been having trouble sleeping? I I do not want you concerning yourself. I will be perfectly fine to find an answer myself, Damien insisted, turning to look out his window so that Bruce could no longer see his face. Damien, Bruce sighed as he shook his head. You don't have to take on everything on your own. We've been over this. I might be able to help you if you tell me what's troubling you. Thick silence filled the car for several moments that made Bruce want to start making demands that Damien speak to him, but he was beginning to learn that doing so was a surefire way to shut Damien down completely. So he waited, as painful as it was. Bruce waited. I have not been sleeping well for the past few weeks. Damien's voice was low, almost a whisper, as he continued staring out the window at the passing scenery. Whenever I try to, my sleep is always interrupted. Bruce gripped the wheel as he listened, only daring to speak when he was sure he would not cut into his son's explanation. Damien, have you been having nightmares? Damien glanced from the window, his cheeks darkening a little before he quickly looked away. Perhaps. Can you tell me what you think they may be stemming from? Bruce ventured carefully, feeling rather victorious that he had gone this far, but keeping it from his voice and trying to sound gently concerned instead. Damien finally looked fully from his window, his eyes glancing from his tightly folded hands to Bruce's face. I am not certain. Bruce nodded, considering for a moment to reach over and pat Damien's leg or reach for his hand, but thought better of it since this was Damien he was talking to, and Damien historically did not respond very well to physical comfort or affection. Well, what can we do to address this problem so you can start getting some better sleep? Would help if I spent some time winding down with you before you try to sleep so you can talk through your day and work out any pent up feelings. Maybe. I could see that being possibly beneficial. I will admit that I have felt a little unsettled about falling asleep because I do not want to give my mind the chance to conjure something up. Damien replied wearily, sighing and looking back at his window. I I wish I could be. Yes, Bruce pressed, taking the chance to look at Damien fully as he stopped at the red light. What is it? Damon's shoulders lifted and dropped in an almost hopeless sort of expression. I I wish I were closer to you in the manor. It would at least feel a little better to know you were near if I did wake up from a troubled night. Bruce quietly considered what Damon had said for a moment before turning back towards the road as he pulled away when the light changed. We might be able to do something about that, he replied thoughtfully. No one could argue that Bruce was the greatest detective and crime fighter that Gotham and perhaps the world had ever known, and these skills could play a useful hand in parenting his misfit band of boys. The only trouble was that he himself had trained those boys to use the skills he had so carefully gathered and cultivated through the years, and there were times that they managed to use that training against him. Even as astute and observant as Bruce was, even with all his training, he did not see the evil smug sly grin of malicious victory that slipped across Damien's face in the reflection of the window. Gosh flipping dang it, Jason, Tim muttered as he gripped the wheel of his car until his knuckles went white and he frowned at the road ahead of him. There were many problems with Jason Todd being back in Gotham, but one of the ones that was annoying Tim to no end at the moment was the fact that everywhere he looked now, Jason was there. A man in a leather jacket walking out of a coffee shop, a cigarette smoking guy in an alley, and just now some punk on a motorcycle zipping around him on the highway. Tim drummed his fingers against the wheel, his temple resting against his knuckles as he began to slip into his thoughts as he left Wayne Enterprises. No, things were stacking up in Tim's head like a precarious Jenga tower just waiting to topple. Jason being back, Tim trying very hard not to let the fact slip when he was around Bruce. Damien seemed to re-up his efforts of being a pain. Bruce trying to get Tim to talk about it being uncomfortable topics. Tim wanting to, for some strange reason to find every chance possible to get around Jason to further unravel the ball of string, and yet not wanting anything to do with it at all. Rationally, Tim knew he should be furiously angry with Jason, and maybe even cripplingly afraid of him at the very least. But his curiosity about Jason was annoyingly overriding those feelings right now. Now, that's not to say that he wasn't angry and wasn't afraid of him. He was. Deeply, in fact, when he really thought about it. He was just storing that neatly away in the I don't have time or energy to feel this right now box that he had tucked away in the back of his mind to deal with later. Tim had found Bruce's extensive study file on side effects of the Lazarus pits shortly after Jason had returned and had recently revisited it when Bruce was not looking. Jason fit almost every single one of them. Pit madness, it was called. Confusion, uncontrollable anger, violent outbursts, disorientation, a sort of invisibility towards pain and wounds, heightened strength, speed, and stamina. and bright green eyes that nearly glowed with intensity. And those were side effects in people that were only almost dead, meaning they were still slightly alive. Jason had been most definitely been all dead. So who knows how much worse the side effects were for someone in his situation. Surely, it wouldn't be fair for Tim to hold Jason completely accountable for his actions post creepy bath when those were from the known side effects, right? Right? Yeah, right. Tim shuddered to shake off the prickly feeling on the back of his neck, and suddenly really did not want to be home. Home and Damien. Damien Algul Wayne. Damien, grandson of the reason Tim was in this predicament in the first place. Algul. Text Bruce Ryan. Tim spoke out in the silence of the car as he flicked on his right blinker and took an exit last minute. Of course, what's the message? The quippy response came from his phone that was set up in the phone holder on his dash. Hey B, I'm going to crash at Dick's. Nothing's wrong, I just want to hang out. Tim paused and thought for a moment before adding, Don't wait on me for a night job. I'll see you at the office tomorrow. Send. Message sent to Bruce Wayne. Tim smirked to himself as he took another exit under a large green sign that said Downtown Bloodhaven. I hope he's not having friends over. Dude, come on, they smoked us. Dick groaned as he flopped back onto the couch with his arms thrown wide, a gaming controller held loosely in his right hand. If we had only followed my perfectly thought out plan, maybe that wouldn't have happened. Dick glowered at the ceiling and huffed heavily as he replied into his gaming headphones mic. Your plan was anything but thought out, Walls. It's only because of my leadership and quick thinking that got us inside the warehouse in the first place. Yeah, well, cue up then, oh captain, my captain. Let's go again and see what we can do to avoid being obliterated. Likely by a group of teenagers. Alright, let me get my things going here, Nick replied as he sat up and clicked through the game options to start a new round. Okay, Wally, let's go at it and get this. Dick reached up and pulled the headphones off his right ear, staring at the door with a raised eyebrow, as he was sure he heard a knock. Dickie, hey, what's going on? Press the start button. Hang on, Walls, I thought I heard. Dick's explanation was cut off as a knock for sure sound now. Someone's at my door. Who would be at your door in the middle of the week? You need me to run over there? No, Wally, hang on, Dick replied as he stood, crossing over the door and listening carefully, reaching for an eskrima stick and that he had set by the door and tucking it tightly behind his back. Just in case. He took a deep breath and unlocked his door and pulled it open with a face ready to greet his landlady and a mindset ready for anything else. He was not ready for the sheepish smile that he was met with instead. Hey, Dick, Tim greeted, his hands shoved as deep into his pockets as the shallow pockets of his dress slacks would allow, and his shoulders caved inward slightly. You busy? Tim, what in the... Why are you... Are you okay? Dick asked, his surprise melting off and his brother's instincts clicking firmly into place as he reached out and gently grasped Tim's shoulders. What's going on? Did something happen? What are you doing in Bloodhaven? What, Dick? Tim laughed as he reached up and grasped Dick's forearms. Slow down, I'm fine, really. I'm okay. Dick blinked blankly at Tim for a moment, his brow pinched up as he searched for signs of harm or damage. Then why are you... Never mind. Here, come in, Dick invited, taking Tim's hand and pulling him into his apartment. Tim allowed himself to be led inside of the second story walkway outside the apartments, reaching with his free hand to shut the door behind him. I hope I'm not bothering you or interrupting anything, he asked with a smile as he glanced at the loading screen of Call of Duty on the TV screen. What? No, no, you're not. You're never a bother, Timmy, Dick insisted, picking up the remote and turning the TV off before reaching up and lowering the mic of his headset in front of his mouth. Hey, boss, I gotta go. No, everything's good. I just got an initiate the baby birth protocol. Look at that rematch later. Tim planted his hands on his hip as he glared at his startled brother. The baby bird protocol? Are you seriously telling me that you have a code for whenever I come over? No, well, not exactly. Dick hemmed around the question with a slow shrug. I mean, technically, you aren't the only baby bird that falls under the protocol, but that's not important right now. Tell me what's going on, he insisted as he reached out for Tim's hand and pulled him down alongside him onto the couch before Tim could protest any further. Tim shrugged and pointed at Dick's headset as he pulled it off and set it on the cluttered coffee table. I didn't mean to end your game. Are you sure Wally won't mind? Of course not, Dick replied with a wave of his hand. It's just a game. We can pick it up anytime. And that falls pretty low on my priority list when it comes to the game or my little brother showing up on my doorstep. He grinned as he reached out and ruffled Tim's hair, effectively loosening it from the initial holes that the gel from that morning had on it. Besides, Wally knows well the parameters of the baby bird protocol. Tim stuck his tongue out, and the frankly embarrassing code Dick had apparently set amongst his friend group for whenever his brother needed him, but smiled afterward, since it was really sort of nice to know that he had thought of such a thing at all. So, Dick asked, curling one leg up on the couch and leaning against the backrest with his cheek resting against his palm, so that he could fully be facing Tim. What's going on with you? What brings you to Bloodhaven in your WE getup? Does there have to be something going on? Tim asked with a shrug. I can't just want to hang out with you. I haven't seen you since I busted my ankle. As much as I would love to believe that your want to hang out with your big bro is the only thing that would bring you to my apartment on a weekday directly after work at WE, I find that extremely unlikely, Dick replied with a smirk. So, why don't we cut the run around, since I would like to think we are way beyond that. And you just tell me what's going on and who I need to kick into next week. Tim held his composure for exactly 2 heartbeats before he allowed that composure to crumble away, sighing hard as he slumped back against the cushions of Dick's slightly greasy second-hand couch, not caring that he was wrinkling his suit and likely getting remnants of Cheeto dust on his pants. I just. I needed somewhere to go that was not the manor, and not the cave, and not a rooftop somewhere. I need to talk to somebody who might actually understand. I need to skip out on patrol. I need junk food. Dick laughed and shook his head as he scooted over to Tim, so he could reach out and ruffle his hair again, his hand sliding down Tim's cheek to come to rest at the base of his neck and shoulder and giving the muscles their squeeze. Well, I'm glad to know that I was the first place you thought of that covered all those bases. He stood and patted him on the shoulder. I'll tell you what, why don't you go change into something more comfortable that you'll chill with, and I'll heat up some hot packs. He pulled a pair of sweatpants and a hoodie from the laundry basket and tossed them at Tim, smirking as Tim raised the clothes to his nose to take a quick whiff of them. Hey, they're clean! You just haven't folded them yet. Tim smiled and started towards Dick's bathroom. Do you have breakfast hot pockets? The sausage and egg ones with the croissant crust? If you don't, my second favorite is the ham and cheese. Dick faked a very shocked gasp with a hand on each cheeks. Are you suggesting that I don't keep breakfast hot pockets? Arguably the best hot pockets to ever exist, stocked in my freezer of glorious pre-processed goodness. Tim grinned as he stepped into the bathroom and rested his hand against the door. Me never. I could never have so little faith in your junk food buying skills. Even though he had closed the door, they could hear him chuckle lightly. Dick's smile wilted for the moment the door closed, his face settling in a light frown as he started opening the packages of the hot pockets and dumping them out on a paper towel. Of course, Dick was happy to see Tim. Of course, he was thrilled that Tim felt confident and comfortable enough to come to his apartment when he needed somewhere to go. Did he also know it probably meant that things were not but aesthetic at the manor? Yes, yes, he did, and that was the part that was only not only made him unhappy, he was downright concerned about it. That's the end of chapter 10. I have been ill for the past week, so this is kind of last minute. Also, my throat is still kind of sore, so I had to do this in sessions of about 15 minutes over the last 2 days and today. Uh, because before that, I could not have read that, and after that, well, my throat was still not sore, but well, after 15 minutes of talking, it was sore. So, if you noticed any noticeable changes or voice quality, yeah, yeah, that's that. But thank you for listening, and um, if you want more content, I've been writing. I think again, I had this idea a long time ago, and I finally fucking start writing it. And maybe that's up at the moment I post this fic. Maybe. I don't know. Could be tomorrow. But I hope you enjoyed. And I hope you had a nice day. Have a nice day. And I hope to see you next week. Bye.